we also have one other very special thing that I wanted to do. Courtney got a library card from us last year, and we're really pleased that he's kind of kept that relationship with the library. And so we asked him if he would please be a star on one of our read posters. There's a lot of famous people in the world who have been on library read posters, and we're about to add one more. So we're going to reveal our read poster. So Courtney, would you come up? This, of course, is to encourage you all to pick up your tablet, pick up your book, get your CD ready, stick it in the car player, whatever, to listen to music and to enjoy what your library can provide to you. And now, Courtney, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
And hear more from you. And thank you so much again for being here.
I think looking from that picture, I needed to spend a little bit more time at the beach that week. Hasty. So it's lovely to see you all again. I'm very excited about this week because September was a long time ago in terms of conducting, and we've planned an enormous amount at the orchestra since September. We've had lots of auditions, we've hired several new musicians. So it's great to be back this time and actually working with the orchestra and getting ready for a concert, which of course from now on is going to at last be much more regular after lots of talking. So this week's concert is the first concert that I've conducted here so far, which is really a program that I worked on with the staff from scratch. At the beginning of the year, in September, that program had already been announced, and we tweaked it a little bit, but it was basically somebody else's idea. And when I was here the previous time, in March of last year, that was a program that was basically handed to me. So this is the first time that there's something that is a sign for what we want to do in the future. So the concert begins with Haydn Symphony Number 92, which is nicknamed the Oxford. And Haydn wrote this piece in the 1780s. And there's lots of speculation around why it's actually called Oxford. The story for many years was that it was played for the first time at a ceremony when Haydn was given an honorary doctorate degree by Oxford. It's very bad luck that it had to be Oxford that gave him that, but there you go. But we actually know now that that isn't what happened, that it had already been premiered a few years before, and it just happened to be the piece that he chose to send to them. And that's a shame, because the story was so nice, because in the minuet of this symphony, which is always a dance, there's a sense of him trying to make the music fall apart by putting the strong beat of the bar in the wrong place. And it's such a wonderful image to imagine academics, with their long gowns and terribly serious, tripping over their feet as they try to keep up with this strange minuet. So this piece is, as far as I can look at from the Symphony Library records, never been played by the Jacksonville Symphony before, despite being very old. And really playing this kind of classical repertoire is the absolute core, if you like, of the musical culture of an orchestra. When we play this kind of classical repertoire, there's something about the way we have to listen to each other and the way we interact with each other that is really the basis for absolutely everything that we do from there on. So it's really exciting to be playing this piece this week and working with the orchestra on ensemble and sound and style, the way of playing. And that's been really great. So it begins with a slow introduction. It's very beautiful, kind of sunny afternoon. And any of you ever drink Pimm's, the stuff that you put in fruit juice, it has a kind of little bit too much Pimm's on a Sunday afternoon kind of feeling. Then there's a very spirited, fast movement in the first movement. Then we have a sort of pastoral second movement, very easy to listen to, very slow and beautiful. Then this minuet. And then a final movement which is presto, just as fast as possible. And this is a real challenge. Haydn wrote the 92nd Symphony at the very end of his time as a court composer. He was pretty much the last composer, I suppose Mozart as well, although Haydn lived longer, who was employed by an aristocrat. You know, if you were a wealthy person, a very wealthy person, you had an orchestra in your house and you employed a composer. And the Prince of Esterhazy really had a pretty spectacular deal because he got Haydn and had him for a long, long time. And all the symphonies up until the late 90s, the London symphonies were written as commissions for London, but until then, every symphony he ever wrote from the middle of his life was written as a piece that would be played in Prince Esterhazy's drawing room. So obviously he wrote very specifically for the musicians in his orchestra, and he had a really, really good second horn player. And that means that there are these really quite extraordinarily difficult second horn parts in all the middle symphonies. So if you come to the concert, which I hope you will, at the very beginning of the finale, you'll hear the cellos playing this extremely fast figure, which is dead easy for them because all they've got to do is that. Then it moves over to the poor second horn player who's got to sort of do something much more difficult. And it's really quite amusing and comical to watch that her trying to execute that. Well, she did a really good job this morning, so that was great. After that, we go to one of my favorite composers alive today, Thomas Adès. He was born in 1971 in London, English composer. And he's probably, you know, with John Adams and Esa-Pekka Salonen, probably one of the most well-known contemporary composers today, particularly in Europe, but also in America. He lives in Los Angeles and London, and the LA Phil plays a lot of his music. I just assisted him conducting a new piece with the New York Phil, so he's pretty well known in America as well. And we're going to be playing more of his music in the future. Next year we play one of his seminal pieces at the very end of the season, a piece called Asyla. Asyla is the plural of asylum, and the idea of the piece is that it's lots of different places that you go. We tend to think of asylum as a word to do with crazy people, but I suppose it actually means a place of refuge. So the piece is about different places of refuge. So anyway, that's coming out next year. This piece is a little bit different because it's not really written by him. It's based on 3 harpsichord pieces by François Couperin, the 18th century French composer. And what Adès does with this music is a little bit like what Stravinsky did in his ballet Pulcinella, if any of you know that piece. That's based on Italian Baroque music by Pergolesi, and Stravinsky basically rewrote the music for a modern orchestra. And that's very much like what Adès does with this piece. So there are these 3 short harpsichord pieces. The first one is called Les Amusements, the Amusements. So that's just a funny nickname for a cheerful piece. Then the second one is called Les Tours de Passe-Passe, which means sleight of hand. And the third is called L'âme en peine, which means the soul in pain. And we hear these 3 little chirpy pieces on a harpsichord, and we're going to actually play a recording for you at the concert of a few bits of the original pieces so you can hear what they originally sounded like. And then the composer rewrites them for a modern chamber orchestra. And it's an orchestra that's divided in 2. So there's an entire string orchestra, as you're looking at the stage on this side, and there's an entire complete string orchestra on the other side. There's a huge range of percussion, bass marimba, rototoms, which are like little mini timpani, all in a row. Lots of interesting percussion, and then a single row of woodwinds as well. And the effect of this piece is that you feel like you're looking at the past through a 21st century crystal ball. The harmony is familiar, like the guts of the music is the same, but it's sort of distorted in a slightly strange kaleidoscopic way, and it's really unbelievable how interesting the sounds are. So this is like a sort of, what I hope everybody experiences at this concert is that they enjoy the music, they have a sort of positive association with this composer, and then you don't all go running for the hills when we play a difficult piece by him next year. That's going to be great. Then the end of the concert is Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra. And this is one of the pinnacles of 20th century composition. Bartók wrote it in 1943. He left Hungary because he was fleeing the Nazis in 1940. And he was a very, very famous composer in 1940. Everybody knew who he was in Europe. And he came to America, and first of all, he lived on West 57th Street. I think there's a little bust of him close to Fifth Avenue. But then he moved up north, actually very close to where I live, to work at Columbia. And nobody knew who he was, and he was poor. He was also ill, and he worked at Columbia on folk music of Asia Minor. All his life he'd collected folk music, and he spent time in Columbia going back into wax cylinder recordings that he'd made of people singing folk songs, transcribing them and writing about them. But because, as this is actually still a topical issue, because he was adjunct faculty at Columbia, he didn't have a salary, he didn't have any health insurance, and he was completely broke. So he was basically dying in hospital in 1943 when Kusevitsky, the music director of the Boston Symphony, came to him in hospital and gave him a check for $1,000 and said, "Write me a piece." And Bartók suddenly recovered the will to live, and at feverish pace between August and October of 1943 completed the whole concerto for orchestra, a 45-minute piece. And it's really singly responsible for establishing him as a repertoire composer. Musicians know who Bartók is because of the string quartets, the most important string quartets since Beethoven, the music for strings, percussion, and celesta. Lots of other pieces, but they're not really pieces that audiences flock to in a concert. And the Concerto for Orchestra, from its very first performance, was exactly one of those things. So it put him on the map. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see that sort of acceleration in his reputation because he died in 1945. It's a piece that's very important for me. I studied it at school and knew it for years, but this is the first time conducting it. And it's been really interesting in the last couple of months to just remember that the connection between knowing a piece really well and conducting it is always not as clear as you would think. It's really taken a lot of work stepping back and learning it. It's called Concerto for Orchestra because it features all the instruments of the orchestra one after another as if they were the soloist in a concerto. So in the first movement we meet everybody. The second movement's title is Game of the Couples, and in that we meet each of the woodwind instruments in pairs. So we meet the flutes and they play. Then we meet the oboes and they play the same music but with a different interval between them. Then we meet the clarinets and they do the same thing. Then we meet the bassoons. Then we meet the brass who play a beautiful chorale. And then all the woodwinds come back one after another at the end of this movement, but they've been joined by a third. So it's a game of couples plus one at that point. And it's really a very exciting and beautiful way of being introduced to the instruments one after another. The third movement is one of Bartók's slow movements, and he has a very particular atmosphere in his slow movements. It's often called night music, and really the music sounds like insects at night. If you're sitting on the porch and you can hear fluttering sounds, or you can imagine things sort of crawling along the ground, that's very much the sound of Bartók's night music. I once visited his house in Budapest, and it was really interesting. It's been left exactly the way it was from the moment that he fled to the States. And you can see his piano, which is full of cigarette butts, or the grand piano in front of the music stand is covered in cigarettes. But on the walls were lots of butterflies and centipedes and all sorts of strange insects that he collected and stuck to the wall with a pin right through the middle. So it's so interesting that he was interested in that, and that his music has this sound often in the slow movements. Then there's a fourth movement which has sort of funny Hungarian folk songs, and then there's a finale which is an incredibly exciting moto perpetuo movement. That means that it basically starts with fast notes, and the fast notes just keep going at the same speed the whole way through. And this really shows off the strings. You hear the cellos and basses beginning, and then the violas, and then the first violins and the second violins. And the music basically builds and builds and builds until it explodes at the very end. So it's a really exciting piece. And I think it demonstrates the virtuosity of our orchestra. it's a great way to end the season with the focus on the musicians in the orchestra rather than a soloist or anything else. So we start that tomorrow morning. We played Adès and Haydn today, and we start Bartók tomorrow morning, so that's really exciting. One funny thing that just happened is that we're using a set of parts that I own of the Haydn myself, and we just hired a new assistant conductor yesterday, which hasn't been announced yet, but will be soon. And he showed up with a score from our library, which was really dreadful, and I just noticed that you actually have the good edition here, so I'm taking this back to the orchestra. There's like a little beacon of light in the middle. These are also fabulous books. This is a slightly hardcore musicology nerd book, which I studied when I was at Cambridge. It talks about how Bartók's harmony is put together. That's like an undergraduate textbook. But there are some fascinating books here about Bartók's letters and more general histories of his life. Couperin's harpsichord pieces are really easy to play. So if any amateur pianists, you could definitely have a go at playing some of those. And there's also lots of Tom Adès' music here. This CD of the violin concerto has an amazing piece that he wrote for the Berlin Philharmonic called Tevot, which means ark, like Noah's Ark in Hebrew, but also the pieces that we're playing on Friday. And over here we've got The Tempest, which is an opera that he wrote was premiered in London in 2003. I was at the premiere, and that is one of the most incredible pieces of music of the last 20 years. So I would really recommend that you take a look at that. So next season, I hope that we are going to be playing a lot more Haydn and Mozart than in the past. There's also going to be a little smattering of contemporary music. And what I really hope is that as we go forward over the next couple of seasons, that everybody trusts that the contemporary music will be enjoyable and that it's not something to be afraid of. We're not going to play anything that I don't believe is a great piece. So we're not going to be testing anything out that hasn't been won over our audiences somewhere else. So please trust me that the diet is going to be very heavily edited before it comes to Jacksonville. There's also a lot of music next season which is well known but just hasn't been played here for a really long time, like Bruckner's Sixth Symphony, Mozart's C minor Mass, and I really hope that you will be able to come and enjoy those concerts. We're choosing music next year for very specific reasons. So I talked about how Haydn helps. It's like visiting the mechanic. And for an orchestra, it helps sort of tighten everything up. Bruckner and Mahler also help us to develop the beauty and the sound of the orchestra, which is really exciting here because we're always able to rehearse in such a great concert hall. And then the newer music, I hope, will excite everybody in the audience and show you that it's something that's part of the classical tradition, not something that's comes from another planet. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you over the next number of seasons.